that the statement of intent for the respective companies ultimately came back to the council for consideration or finalisation. I've obviously got that wrong, and here we've got reference only back to a significant change there too. If we were to assume a new water company to take responsibility for Rotanawa, which has very substantive council objectives in it beyond an pure investment scenario, does that statement of intent come back to council for confirmation?
So the point there will be is that any shareholding that theoretically HBRIC had in a water project would be exactly that, a shareholding. As we're all aware, any investment that HBRICs might make will not be the total investment quantum. So it's effectively in some sort of partnership arrangement, JV arrangement, or whatever. So what you would see via HBRIC is the reflection of its interest in that, and the council assets and the performance at that level. That's the way you need to look at that one. As you'll be aware, the council's articles and its intent around the RWS is predominantly reflected through the concession deed. Okay?
Follow through, and I think you'll realise why it's an important point. Is it worth considering in our commentary here that the first statement of intent for those entities is referred back to council for consideration? And why I say that is that the means by which we are driving our various outputs for the water storage project is through their HBRIC statement of intent. I think there needs to be assurance that the subsequent downstream company at least fully reflects that intent, and to confirm that by reference back to council, perhaps in the first instance.
But hang on, before you answer that, it raises another question. When does the term deemed director become apparent? Can someone answer that before you answer that particular question? Because if we're making decisions over and above the entity that owns the company, are we then liable or subject to deemed director status as councillors? But then answer that question.
Well, do you want to answer? Do you want me to answer?
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
No, it's not tricky. It's quite clear.
Oh, either way.
It's not tricky. If the council starts making decisions, material decisions that affect the company over and above its board of directors, then you will be deemed directors. So the issue of deeming is when the council, for example, I'll try and think of an example here. If the council intervened, say in the port's operations, said we want you to build this asset or that asset, which is materially affected the commercial operations of the port and its ability to operate, then you would be deemed directors. That's the point. So I think that, and what I was then going to say is that really what if you look at the RWS as a case in point, the way to look at it is there are a number of instruments that are designed to reflect and deliver the council's purpose in that project. The primary article or document is the concession deed, which frames up in any company that operates under that concession deed will have to operate in consistency with it. That's the first point. Now the council will get a chance to effectively review that when there's a proposition that lands on the table from HBRIC as to whether to invest or not. If the recommendation is to invest, then the test you would expect of HBRIC is that they've categorically outlined in their recommendation to you that this proposed investment consortium company arrangement, whatever it is, delivers on the purpose of that concession deed. That's the point at which you get the chance to really influence that point. I mean, that's much more accurate than a statement of intent.
It's not a simple issue.
If I could step in, sorry, I'm standing all over your toes. But the challenge is RWS one place. Let's look at another company. HBRIC may end up with. The question is valid. If it's a inland port or whatever it may be, the first round of SOI, would that trigger the deemed director issue,
Don't think so.
where it doesn't have a concession or anything to deal with any issues we may have with it?
But remembering that there's a difference between a shareholding as part of a investment framework and majority or ownership. So you've got to remember that what's the extent to which the council's investment via HBRIC, what proportion of that is, because if you're a majority owner, you get the say of the SOI, but what you want is, if you're in a minority, you need to see that reflected through HBRIC SOI. That's the point.
Can I just ask a question around coming back to the fact that it is, and perhaps a better wording might have been decided here, if any material changes are proposed by the subsidiary, well, I would think an entirely new SOI was material. So I assume that it would come back under that. And I guess the semantic around is it a change or is something new? If it's sufficient to bring back an SOI because of material change, it's sufficient to bring back an
So
SOI.
it doesn't capture Councillor Kirk's issue, I suppose, is the question.
And is there a better wording to make sure that that's clear?
There must have.
Well, I think the key issue is it is a subsidiary. If it is a subsidiary, and a lot of these will be associate company, but if it is a subsidiary, I take your point. If they're going to consult, it's not approve, consult on a material change, then you need the original document to have been consulted on. Otherwise, you won't really understand what the material change is.
Mr. Chairman, there's another protection there as well, and that is that if there are to be new subsidiaries created, certainly at this point in time and for foreseeable future, they would have to be funded essentially by advance or equity coming from the council, which requires a business case to be put before the council and approved. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to belabor it because it is very important to me particularly. So we're saying that the instrument of a statement of intent does not in itself deem a director. So the council was not deemed a director by the mere fact of using the statement of intent instrument. Is that your interpretation?
Yes, that's correct. But remember this, is that the statement of intent ultimately has to be agreed by the directors of the company. That's the protection against that, Neil, if you follow.
Okay, yes. So it's their decision.
Yes, in the end it is. Yes.
And this essentially, though, we're looking to make sure that our arm's length relationship doesn't invoke a deemed director situation.
That's right.
That's what we're trying to do. What worries me here is that very important downstream companies are proposed, and now I've heard this new notion of associated companies, and I'm wanting to be clear about the instrument that we use as council to guide and direct them. And I assume it's a statement of intent, and if it is so, I would suggest that those statements of intent come back to council for ratification.
No, it's not. Well, it depends, because if you're the sole owner, yes, that's fine. But if you're not, if you're sitting in a JV or something, what you effectively are doing is you are charging HBRIC to look after your interests, and that then cascades in one way, obviously, is depending on the shareholding arrangement, the proportionality of that, and so forth, as they appoint directors. That's the process. But you can't. I mean, why I'm being a bit pedantic about my answers here is because, in the end, the minority shareholder cannot absolutely instruct a company that's to do what I mean, it's not. You either 100% and you get your SOI, or you're a majority, or you rely on the governance instruments and so forth, and concession deeds and so on, to make sure that works. But I think you're asking.
Taking your argument as logical conclusion, though, we've said in this document, if any material changes, they have the same impact. You say if that subsidiary company, which may be a joint or associated company, makes a material change, this tells me that change is notified back to council. Does that breach the multi-party nature or multi-shareholder nature of the subsidiary company?
Oh, okay, so this is conceptual. Will you go?
Related question to that, yeah. And I think it's the language that's being used. As this says, will consult, and then something we heard ratification. There's quite a difference between consult and ratification. And I think we've got to look at the language that's used in the SRI, which is very different from actually the SOI between HBRIC and a subsidiary or its share and then the other partners would be between those two, and they can consult up to council. But if the relationship is not directly with council with the subsidiary company, is that correct?
Yeah, I think you've got it exactly right, Councillor Scott. The HBRIC liaise with the associated company or subsidiary company vis-a-vis their statement of intent. That's their job. However, if they consider there is a material difference in a previous one, then they consult with their major shareholders. HBRIC will consult with us. That's just a consultation, just a chat. So it's nothing more than that. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Bream as well.
You just on the first page of this paper, the council paper, page 73, 6.2, about the conflict of interests report and recommendations. Could that also deal with the independent directors as well, please? Not just the councillor directors.
If the independent directors have a conflict of interest, they've got to declare it
That's right.
in normal commercial manner. Otherwise, they're in trouble. It's not necessary.
Councillor Gilbertson.
There are, I mean, what's the harm of getting that looked at and clarified, because
it's just you're going well beyond your responsibilities as a shareholder, in my view.
Councillor, I think if you recall the discussion that probably triggered that, it was definitely perceived concerns about perceptions of conflicts of interest of the council or directors, who then have to sit around this table and make decisions on some of the key recommendations that may come from the board. So it's not driven by concerns around the actions or otherwise of the independent directors.
right, that's correct. But is the other thing a possible concern, and is it something that we should be looking at in advance?
We've
The standing item on the agenda, if the board agenda, is declarations of conflict of interest.
You know,
And ultimately, councillor, if there are...
Exactly the same as we have to do.
Yeah, exactly the same as we do here. And reality is, HBRIC belongs to this council. So if there are... the SOI is not the only vehicle you could have to have this discussion,
yeah.
in
Well,
my mind.
I'm not party to those HBRIC meetings, or nor do I get the minutes. So I'm
You're lucky.
So I don't know if that question is routinely asked, or if those conflicts or perceived conflicts are routinely.
Perhaps,
mentioned.
Mr. Drury, you could talk about the other organisations, i.e., that directors have to answer to as far as conflicts and all these other issues go. It's not just council protocols to adhere to.
It's part of legislation and the Companies Act, from what I believe. Directors must declare a conflict of interest, and they're very quick to do so, to be fair, because not to do so could occasion significant liability. So professional directors are well aware if there's a conflict of interest. The same as councillors are, to be fair. I mean,
yeah,
you're right up front on that.
I mean, this is a board that's dealing with B&Z, and one of the directors.
Understand all that, and that's been actively managed, councillor.
Well, I'm just asking for transparency about this because why can't we just be, upfront about it? Really?
Oh, it's not an SOI issue, to be blunt. Councillor Gilbertson.
Surely it must be an SOI issue because this is my question: is this not one of the most important issues? Because we do have a letter from the mayors, and until last week I didn't realise that the unanimous view is of all their councils that they're major investors. There's a political angle and a financial angle. They're saying you guys are putting 80 million of our money into this thing. We want to be absolutely certain that that Caesar's wife is above suspicion. And also there's an election coming up, and so there's a huge political risk to us and everyone. So the fact that the two mayors representing 100,000 people have written a letter on this makes this more than just a legalistic thing about declaring interest. This makes it a vitally, fundamentally important issue to the SOI. So my view is that, as I say, that letter represents 100,000. Well,
Make your point.
The point is, if we have a letter from a major investor, financial investor, and people who can possibly
explain their investment.
They are putting $80 million into this.
Who are the two councils?
The citizens of Hawke's Bay, who are represented by us and by the councils, are putting $80 million.
Well, they're represented by us in total.
No, by the community is putting in $80 million. Whether you say they're represented through us or through Hastings or Napier, their representatives have signalled serious concern about the safety of their investment because of the perceived conflict of interest. So that must be an absolutely fundamental issue for this SOI. Is that not correct?
Which is addressed.
I mean, through you,
No, so I'm saying the way of addressing it, to say that we're going to look at that and we're going to actually extend this board for 6 months, and we're going to allow them to give us a report on perceived conflict of interest, which I don't think will add any light to the thing at all, because the issues are pretty well in front of us. Should we not be taking more urgent action than saying we'll get a report and in a year's time or however long it is, we'll think about reconstituting that board? Shouldn't we be taking this concern by up to $100,000 of our citizens more seriously?
Well, we are taking it seriously, councillor. That letter was answered.
I disagree.
That letter was answered. We agreed.
Yeah.
We agreed.
No, you agreed, Mr. Chairman. I didn't agree.
Totally, though.
I disagree.
The two mayors brought it forward. It hasn't been publicly debated in the two councils. They've had two meetings. The issues were aired. The letter was written and it was answered after two meetings. The agreement was simple. There is plenty of time to deal with this.
Clarification: they said it was unanimous. The letter said it was unanimous decision.
Well, they didn't have a debate about it.
it was never publicly
It was
debated.
never publicly debated.
So
It was never workshopped.
Doesn't matter, but that doesn't mean it wasn't a unanimous decision of council. It might have been recorded as such, but it could be.
Yep.
So the question I answered, well, obviously the answer is that you don't think it's that important. We can let this issue.
I do think it's important, and
So
it's
it's not
covered in
important enough-
6.2.
No, but it's not addressed. It's not addressed until way down the track. It's not.